let's unpack this because I literally just closed the window on the orientation webinar for the 30-day devotional prescription for love, and my mind is just racing.
Oh, absolutely.
I had to talk through this with you, obviously with you listening right now, because it just completely challenged my preconceived notions about daily routines in general.
Right. What's fascinating here is how the facilitator established that tone immediately. It was so calm and thoughtful, perfectly matching this kind of post-webinar vibe we're sitting in.
Yeah, it wasn't what I expected at all.
Not at all. It bypassed that typical, dry theological lecture format entirely. She just seamlessly blended these really rigorous medical and wellness concepts with this pursuit of deep spiritual intimacy.
And you just don't see that.
You really don't. We rarely observe those two spheres actively informing one another with such practical methodology. Modern discourse usually keeps them entirely separated.
And that separation is exactly what this session just dismantled right out of the gate.
Mm-hmm.
The first major pivot that caught me off guard was how she redefined the devotional life itself.
Mm-hmm.
Because the conventional image we all have is, waking up hours before dawn for this extended, intense study. But she explicitly countered that.
She went the complete opposite direction.
She did. She emphasized quality over quantity. Just 10 to 30 minutes of undisturbed time.
Mm.
And the specific, highly relatable hack she gave, the physical boundary she suggested, was literally the stay in bed strategy.
Which sounds counterintuitive at first.
Right. But the instruction is to actually complete the devotional practice before your feet even hit the floor. I have to ask you, listening to this right now, how often do you jump out of bed and immediately let the day hijack your mind?
Oh, for most people, it's instantaneous. The mechanics of that physical boundary she suggested are really worth examining deeply.
Let's get into that, yeah.
Because when you wake up, your body naturally experiences this cortisol awakening response to get you moving. And in our permanent environment, reaching for a phone immediately hijacks that biological process.
You're just flooding your system.
Exactly. It introduces external stressors, the emails, the news cycles, social media before the prefrontal cortex is even fully engaged. By staying in bed, she's suggesting you create this geographical and psychological sanctuary.
A literal safe zone.
A safe zone that signals to your nervous system that this time is guarded. It keeps the sympathetic nervous system from kicking into fight or flight mode prematurely. The phone stays off, the mind stays clear.
But I was thinking about the friction there. For a parent with young kids or a caregiver or someone working multiple shifts, staying in bed for 30 uninterrupted minutes.
It borders on the impossible.
It really does. But I think the underlying challenge she was laying down isn't necessarily about the mattress itself. It's about how to manufacture an impenetrable boundary when your environment is actively trying to dismantle it.
That's a crucial distinction. The boundary is less about the physical location and more about the cognitive state.
Right.
By refusing to cross the threshold into the demands of the day until you've centered yourself, you're resisting that conditioning that demands immediate reactivity.
The analogy that kept coming to my mind during the session was treating this time like a highly concentrated daily vitamin.
I like that.
Because trying to consume a massive 5-course meal of spiritual discipline every single morning is just a recipe for burnout.
Mm-hmm.
You might manage it for a week, but eventually the sheer volume becomes exhausting. You just abandon it.
You drop the habit completely.
Exactly. But a 10-minute vitamin is sustainable. It fundamentally shifts the goal from this exhaustive study to consistent spiritual nutrition.
And sustainability is the operative word for a 30-day program. To understand why she approaches it with such an emphasis on the practical and the physiological, we really have to look at her background.
Yes. Here's where it gets really interesting. She brings 23 years of pharmacy experience to that.
23.
And 10 years in real estate. Alongside that, that clinical background completely reframes the narrative here. It's a paradigm where she's arguing that the great physician, meaning God, should be the absolute first recourse.
At the last resort.
Exactly. Not the final option when allopathic medicine has reached its limits.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it challenges the historical compartmentalization we've accepted for centuries in the West. Post-Enlightenment culture has largely separated the body and the spirit.
Completely walled them off from each other.
Right. If you have a physiological issue, you consult a clinician. If you have an emotional or existential issue, you talk to a therapist or a clergy member. But her thesis reconnects them. She observed from her time dispensing medications that underlying spiritual or emotional deficits, chronic stress, unresolved problems frequently manifest as physical pathologies.
That is a massive pivot from the standard clinical approach. It implies that modern medicine is often tasked with treating the physical symptoms of what is actually a spiritual crisis.
Yes.
You could theoretically be managing a physiological symptom with medication for decades without ever addressing the root cause.
Because professional oaths and personal callings intersect here. As a pharmacist, her professional oath is to aid in physical healing through pharmacological intervention. She respects the science deeply.
She wasn't anti-medicine at all.
Not in the slightest. But she noted a personal calling to point people towards spiritual resources because treating the symptom without addressing the holistic state of the individual is fundamentally incomplete.
And she didn't just theorize about this mind-body connection either. She gave that very tangible case study regarding her own 30-day fasting and prayer experience.
The physiological outcomes she reported there were striking.
They were. I mean, it wasn't framed simply as an exercise in asceticism or, feeling a little more peaceful. She reported that this spiritual discipline tangibly changed her sleep patterns, it shifted her dietary cravings, and dramatically sharpened her cognitive focus. It proved the intense connection between mind, body, and spirit.
Fasting is perhaps the most visceral example of this intersection. From a clinical perspective, intentionally disrupting your biological intake forces a systemic physiological reset.
Right.
It impacts insulin sensitivity, triggers cellular autophagy. But what the webinar highlights is that this physiological disruption, when paired with intentional spiritual focus, creates a profound feedback loop.
The physical discipline yields a physiological reset,
which clears the psychological static,
which enables deeper spiritual clarity. It's an incredible mechanism. And that comprehensive, holistic approach is exactly how the scriptural study for the program was structured too.
The textual pairings she utilized were highly intentional.
I was in awe of how she paired these seemingly disconnected scriptures. She didn't rely on standard isolated verses.
No, she drew a direct typological line from the Old Testament book of Numbers to the New Testament Gospel of John.
Specifically pairing Numbers 21.4 through 9 with John 3.14 through 16. It was a fascinating connection between the bronze serpent in the wilderness and Christ being lifted up on the cross.
By connecting the physical venom of the fiery serpents in the Old Testament to the spiritual venom of sin in the New Testament, she demonstrated that God's narrative of healing has always been comprehensive.
It perfectly illustrates that ongoing narrative. You look to the pole for physical salvation in the wilderness, and you look to the cross for spiritual salvation. It's a seamless through line.
It shows why this matters. It proves that the concept of the divine as the ultimate holistic healer isn't some modern reinterpretation. It is the foundational architecture of the text.
And she anchors all of this theology in one very specific core foundation. She brought in Mark 12.29 through 31.
The greatest commandment.
Yes, the command to love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. It ties perfectly back to the program's title, Prescription for Love.
That text serves as the stabilizing anchor for the entire 30-day program. It prevents the practices from devolving into mere behavioral modification.
Precisely. Without God's unfailing love as the active ingredient in the prescription, the boundary setting just becomes an exercise in time management.
And the fasting just becomes a diet.
Exactly. The spiritual mechanics only function when powered by that specific foundation of personal growth and relational love.
Which leads us to how that love is actually operationalized in real time. Because the orientation did not keep these concepts in the abstract realm of clinical theory.
No, it was incredibly grounded. I was so moved by the vulnerability of the webinar participants.
The level of candor was notable.
It was a completely different dynamic than what you usually see. People were talking about real, heavy realities. We heard real people articulating profound anxiety, the stress of navigating new jobs, the precariousness of starting businesses.
The overarching difficulty of trusting God's plan during major life transitions.
Yes, it was a stark departure from that curated professionalism you usually encounter in online spaces.
This raises an important question, and it's one I think you, listening right now, should critically examine. How do you handle isolation when navigating those kinds of acute transitions?
It's a tough question.
It is, because modern culture often dictates a paradigm of rugged individualism. We're subtly encouraged to figure it out privately, to compartmentalize our anxieties so they don't inconvenience anyone.
But the webinar actively pushed back against that cultural norm. Her response to their vulnerability was to emphasize the absolute necessity of community. specifically small, spirit-filled communities.
She's advocating for distributed emotional and spiritual load bearing.
Exactly. She shared that specific anecdote about her own life, relying heavily on a faith community of just 10 to 15 individuals who prayed for her. But the love in this context wasn't just an abstract feeling.
It was operationalized through tangible service.
Practical service, bringing meals, giving rides, offering structured coaching and mentorship. It was the physical manifestation of spiritual support.
Grounding the concept in actual people who stepped into the logistical chaos of her life proves that spiritual intercession requires a designated group willing to bear that daily friction. When someone is experiencing the heightened stress of a career transition, dropping a meal off at their door is a profoundly spiritual act.
It addresses the biological need, which lowers the psychological stress, which opens the capacity for spiritual peace. It's that mind-body-spirit connection played out on a sociological level.
It's a completely integrated system.
It really is.
Yeah.
So what does this all mean in terms of tangible next steps? Because she gave actual homework.
Highly specific, operational next steps.
Right. Participants are assigned to read pages 2 through 11 of the material, complete the corresponding workbook pages, and she strongly emphasized picking up the physical book from lulu.com.
The recommendation for the physical text is rooted in making the processing more tactile, highlighting, annotating.
Exactly. Active contribution rather than passive consumption. And she also provided that simple 3-step evangelism note for sharing faith.
And the note from the pharmacist.
Yes. Admit sin, believe in Christ, invite Jesus in, an incredibly pragmatic toolkit.
It's a comprehensive protocol. But before we wrap up our thoughts, there is a broader implication here to leave you with, something to mull over. If we truly believed her core thesis that our spiritual health directly dictated our physical and mental well-being, how differently would we structure our mornings tomorrow?
That reframes the entire conversation.
If biological health is intrinsically tethered to daily mental sanctuaries and spiritual community, it completely changes the urgency of how we wake up and who we rely on.
It really does. Seriously, hearing us talk about it is one thing, but you have to experience it yourself. The full orientation webinar is absolutely worth watching from start to